Today we're going to talk about relationships in residency. While our journey is specific to us, there are a lot of things that helped us navigate residency as a team. It's not easy to be the partner of a physician, let alone that of a resident. Colin could honestly write the book on doing it with aplomb. I cannot imagine how difficult it is for a partner to support a resident who is struggling. And there are so many things that Colin did to make my life manageable during training and beyond. We just want to share some of our story and the things that we learned and what worked for us. Thanks for coming on today, Colin.
Yeah, excited to be back on.
So just to start with the story of how we met when I was a fourth year medical student doing an ENT away rotation at Vanderbilt in Nashville. And Colin had moved from Boston to Nashville a couple years before that, post-grad.
Yeah, and what she usually does not mention in the story of how we met is that she did not initially tell me that she didn't live in Nashville. We met and I just assumed she was like full-time working at Vanderbilt, living in Nashville. Did not know that until our second date.
Yeah, I mean, it's classified information. Like, why I don't have to tell somebody on a first date where I live or don't live,
That's true, but that's like a classic Nashville thing. Everyone's always, coming in, visiting. Hard to tell, who actually lives here. Didn't matter though.
Yes. So I guess in a sense I catfished you. But yeah, we matched on Bumble. Our first date was at Jed's Sports Bar in Nashville, just like a Wednesday evening. And yes, on the first date, like I said, I did not typically, I would barely even tell people I was a medical student. Like that wasn't a huge boon for people in the dating world at the time. On our second date, Colin told me, oh, I really like you. And in response, I was like, oh, I don't live here. I don't go here. And so then I kind of had to fess up to the whole, visiting medical student gambit. But that being said, we kind of hung out for a week. I went to Sacramento to do my last rotation at UC Davis, and I didn't have any like immediate rotations or any plans after that time. So I actually flew back from Sacramento to Nashville, and we really continued dating at that time. But yeah, those were the crazy early days. What I do like to say about it is that, Colin did the regular cool guy move, which is that right before I left, he was like, well, you're going to Sacramento for a month. Like, we'll see how it goes. Like, I'm pretty busy. We may not talk every day. We'll just see what amount we talk or what I can fit in my schedule. And I was like, yeah, okay, man. Sounds good. Bye. Got on a plane. Every morning at like 6 a.m. Sacramento time, he was texting me like a new song or a new thought. And yeah, so it's been great. We've been shooting the shit for 8 years together now. And what was crazy about that first year was that I was, going through the ENT interview and match process. One relationship defining fork in the road was when in November of that year, I got waitlisted at Vanderbilt. And so, I told him the news kind of thinking, well, this might just be the end of it, because we had been hoping obviously like to continue dating and stuff like that. But once I realized, well, the likelihood of that I'll be in Nashville is much lower, I just kind of was like, okay, well, this is it. And Colin was like, no worries at all. He was like, I'll move with you wherever you match at, like whatever we're going to do. And so obviously that meant a lot. Like that was pretty early into dating, but it just like, it was very different from what I've experienced before in dating. And not only that, but just even like as a physician, you spend your whole life being like very career achievement oriented, and maybe your family rewards achievement and things like that. And so it just meant a lot for Colin to kind of validate. He was like, I have no worries about you getting waitlisted at Vanderbilt or anything. Like, wherever you end up going, I'll move with you there. And I really do think that, yeah, that's probably one of those early on scenarios that like showed his commitment to a serious relationship, and also what kind of partner he would be, showed his character for the long term. So what happened was then in March, we did the match process and figured out where we were going in the Midwest. And like 2 weeks later, we signed a lease sight unseen near the hospital. And so, that was 6 months into dating that we signed that first lease together. Right.
Yeah, that was pretty crazy. I remember like going through the process. I was kept sneaking out at work. We had to like call, the lenders and do credit checks and everything. And yeah, I mean, I think we saw like 3 pictures of it and just had to jump on it. Basically, we didn't like we weren't going to get up there for 2 months or something, so we didn't really have much of a choice.
Yeah, that was the first time that we would, sign a lease sight unseen. But then I think we bought, multiple houses. We bought this house sight unseen. The market kind of went berserk after that. But you know, it was just pretty crazy. And when I look back, I mean, I get how the optics of that look. And what's so funny is that right before I graduated, one of the attendings just told me in the OR, like pretty offhanded, they were like, "Oh, I did not think you and Colin were gonna make it." Like we showed up brand new, much less than a year into dating, maybe like 8, 9 months into dating. We were like, yeah, whatever. We moved here together. We adopted our cat, a Maine Coon named Edley, that first summer. So, again, we'd been together 10 months when we got her. And you can, well, people can't see, so I'm not going to point out Beignet. But, it was pretty funny because I think that at the time, a lot of people at the hospital and things like that kind of question people moving to a new place together so early on. But I actually do think that residency and kind of the trials and tribulations of all of that did bring us closer together.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I actually still have the voicemail when you called me and said that we got the house in Columbia. That's like probably the one of the oldest things that I still have from us together. But yeah, I mean, I see a lot of like threads and stuff about this online, especially like around match week. That time, people are always asking about how did you navigate matching into a city that you weren't expecting. I have a career here, we have family here, like what's the plan? And I don't think I did this intentionally at the time in terms of saying, oh, we'll just move wherever you end up. That's just legitimately how I felt. Honestly, I didn't even know that much about the process and kind of what was going to happen. But looking back, like I do think that's probably pretty critical. Like if you're in a relationship about to go into that process, I think you have to have it pretty laid out that like no matter what, we're either moving together, or you have to say like, okay, if you're in this city, we'll be together. If not, then it's long distance. I mean, yeah, I think you just have to have that hashed out, or else you're just going to get, I mean, the process is insane and there's really no way to control where you end up. So, almost making that decision before it happens is probably going to set you up like a lot better in the long run.
Oh, totally agree. Because I can imagine, if people aren't doing that, like that would be kind of heartbreaking for it to be like, oh, you matched in a cool city. I will come with you, or like, oh, you matched in some random town I don't want to live in, like just not coming, I agree that having your goals aligned beforehand and having those like full conversations would help a lot. And we will talk a little bit about that actually later in the episode as well. But one thing that I will say from like the resident perspective, and Colin's not a physician, he was not a resident. So he did have a lot more mobility in the digital marketing world and everything like that. But we were often advised as new residents, if you had a partner moving with you who was non-hospital, or, even if they work in a hospital, we were advised that it would be okay to reach out to like the residency coordinator to ask, hey, do you know of like any jobs or any recommendations for people to connect with, like in this totally brand new town for this person who's looking for a job? And we did do that, and talk to the department briefly. And there was very little support from the place that I trained at. And that was not unique to me because I know that there were other resident physicians who also like really even more stringently than in our case, but they were very long-term couples, even married at times, where their partners needed jobs. And our department and its members were just generally like not willing to or able to provide any connection or networking or guidance from that standpoint. But I think that's a little bit institution dependent.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to do, obviously, because like, just so many different types of jobs that people would be looking for. And, I was working in the publishing industry down in Nashville. Like I've been basically doing that since I graduated. There's not a publishing industry, in Missouri. So that was a little tough. And I knew that I wasn't gonna be able to find sort of a one-to-one job. I think they connected me with like the one of their like mortgage lenders that they had worked with, who was just kind of a guy about town who like knew people, and that was it. And I talked to him and he was like, oh, I'll maybe connect you with someone. And I had like one phone call and that kind of went nowhere. You would think it'd actually be relatively easy, especially where we were. I mean, it's like it's a fairly tight knit community around there. I'm sure people could like relatively easily place a call or two and help out spouses or people moving there to at least get some interviews. I mean, obviously you can't guarantee a job, but that was a little bit of a hectic time there because I knew I was going to have to quit my job. I mean, this was before remote work even kind of existed. Now, I mean, it would be much easier for me, but obviously a lot of people don't, have that opportunity anyway. So
Yeah, but I have friends who have chairs where they just personally, were willing to make phone calls or help connect people or just, give a gentle recommendation or kind of explain the situation and help network. So hopefully when people do have that type of like resource and support available that, they're able to use it.
yeah, and I think for like partners of residents, like especially if you're fairly young. I mean, I was what 26, 27, you were 24, 25. I think you got to be pretty realistic. Like unless you're able to match into your hometown, like, and you don't have to move anywhere. If you're going to move to a brand new city, I basically just restarted. I kind of ended what I was doing and I literally got onto Google Maps and just like scanned every street with all the businesses in town and just kind of cold email and called people. And I ended up finding a guy who, sort of not even really a friend of a friend, but he knew a guy that I went to college with and he had started a business and ended up, having a good interview with him and working for him. But I just think, unfortunately, like you do have to take a back seat in a lot of cases. Just knowing that there's no flexibility around residency and this is what you've matched in a certain spot. And hopefully, yeah, you can take your job on the road or work remote or whatever it is. But it's pretty likely that, you're going to have to either restart or drop down a level or find something new that wasn't quite in line with, what you were expecting maybe in your own career path. But, at least for me, I mean, I think it was well worth it. I was also looking for something that could give me flexibility, like moving forward, knowing that, you were going to be working all these crazy hours. I was going to have to help out a lot more and that we would be moving eventually. Like we probably wouldn't stay there. So trying to start like a long-term career, even in one spot, doesn't even really make sense from that standpoint.
Yeah. So, I know you did start over in digital marketing, but kind of like gained a totally new skill set, which then did translate into, like multiple kind of successful job moves down the road.
Worked out very well. Obviously, I think I got pretty lucky with it. But yeah, I mean, it's a tough reality just knowing that like, kind of any way you spin it, you're gonna take a back seat a little bit, at least from a career standpoint. And depending on how long the residency or, what the prospects afterwards are going to be, that might continue moving forward. So you definitely have to be pretty realistic going into it.
Yeah. So what advice would you have for somebody who is going to move to a totally new spot with their partner who's a resident and, that they do need to look for jobs? Like in smaller towns, is Google Maps a good way to just legitimately scour?
I mean, that was a little bit of my last resort. The problem is, you don't match until March and then you got to move there in July. So it's like a very tight window. I mean, you got a couple months basically to figure it out. I don't think I landed that job till maybe end of May or something. So I was kind of coming down to the wire in terms of like what I was going to end up doing there. But yeah, I mean, I went through kind of all the job boards. I had applied for everything that was available kind of within my skill set. And I got a few interviews and it just kind of didn't go anywhere. That's when I just resorted to literally reaching out directly to people. And, that's such like a kind of boomer advice at this point, right? Just like put on your best suit, walk in there and ask for a job. It literally did work for me though. So I don't know. They might be onto
Yeah, it was
something
a
there.
small town. It was a
Yeah,
small
yeah, yeah.
town. And like it was, like Colin said, it was pre-remote work. Like I think your job search would have looked different today, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
I guess the difference probably in when I was initially applying to jobs, I just was kind of putting my resume out there for a ton of different stuff. And I was like, I'll kind of take whatever. And then once that didn't work, I really honed in. And I said, okay, this is what I want to do. And there are a limited amount of companies in this place that we're going to that do that. And so I need to make like really specific personalized pitches like to those. And I think that's kind of ultimately the difference. What happened there is like, I just, and frankly, I was willing to work for not that much money. Like we were moving to a smallish town, cost of living was pretty low, and we didn't have any kids, we didn't even have pets at that point, so like there wasn't much in terms of expenses I was worried about. So I definitely took a pay cut just to do that. For me, it was worth it because I was going to be kind of learning a new skill set, something that was going to be very like transferable in the future. In that sense, it was worth it to take the cut and try something new. And I think that's kind of what you're going to have to make the decision on. Like, do you want to try and find something along the same lines you've been doing that maybe isn't as good of a job, or it's going to kind of stagnate your career, or this might be a good time to hit the reset button and say, you know what, I've just been working whatever job for 5, 6, 7 years out of college because that's what my first job was. And is that really what I want to do forever? Or is this an opportunity to kind of step back and, try something new?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in terms of how things went from there, like intern year was a blur. We spent 6 months on ENT and then 6 months off, going through other rotations. The year it honestly, like, it went pretty smoothly. Yeah, it was busy. We had a new kitten at home. That's Edley the Maine Coon. But, it went still pretty well. Very minimal drama or anything. But when I became a second year resident, multiple kind of crazy things happened at once, which, number one, for ENT, when you become a second year, then you start taking junior call. And we were home call, but it was definitely a busy home call. And not only that, but we were taking airway emergency calls. So even as a brand new second year resident, you could be called, to the ICU, to the emergency room, wherever, for a very acute airway. And so the learning curve on now suddenly taking junior call, that is a very steep one. And also it's just a big lifestyle transition because we never took much call as an intern. Definitely no real call, a little bit of buddy call, things like that. But yeah, so now your primary call. So you're not getting much sleep because your primary call, like, at least one night a week. And the night that you're on, you don't get much sleep. Additionally, we did something really crazy, which is that we got our puppy, Beignet the Golden Doodle. If you are watching us on YouTube, you can see that Beignet is calmly passed out in the corner of my office behind me. He is a very chill guy.
You just woke him
He's up. Oh, he heard his name. Okay. He's a chill guy, but he was not a chill puppy. And so, of course, like, that's pretty normal for puppyhood. But it really, I remember that summer very well because, I was taking call. The couple of nights I wasn't on call, we had a puppy crying in our bedroom. And so kind of dealing with all of that was a lot. And then also one of our chief residents was kind of an enormous bully, and it created a lot of strife at work. That wasn't even really like targeted at me, not even personal at me, but just kind of across the board strained relations between a lot of the residents, attendings and residents, etc. So that was a crazy year. I do feel like that's kind of when things took a turn.
Getting Beignet was was kind of wild. I mean, I remember going into it. So we got Edley pretty quickly, and that was like,
It
okay,
was
we're gonna
July
try.
of intern year.
Yeah, and which was like almost immediately.
Yeah.
That was like, okay, we're gonna get a pet, we're gonna try it out. And Edley, as a Maine Coon, basically acts like a dog. She used to play fetch with us as like a kid, and I mean, she's crazy. She's super talkative now. Um, but I remember the plan was you were going to have like a month or two of research your third year. And that was when we were going to get a dog. And so you were going to have, a month or two to spend at home with the new puppy. And that was like the big plan. And then all of a sudden you found Beignet and you sent me a picture. We just ended up getting him like immediately. Way ahead of schedule. And yeah, he's a very anxious guy. He was, at least. He still kind of is. But and we had a dog like our next door neighbor had that little yappy dog who would just bark like all night and keep Beignet up. That was pretty rough. That was a tough timing to like start your junior call with like a new puppy who like couldn't sleep through the night. I think you had some rough nights at the beginning there.
Yeah, but we, just in terms of, but I would not do anything differently. Like in terms of, would I not get a puppy at that same time, knowing everything that happened? I would not, because Beignet is the best, and he would go on to like save my life a couple times during residency. So like, shout out to Beignet. And I would not do anything differently from that standpoint. In terms of how we adjusted, though, like definitely, I mean, Colin and I always kind of stayed in sync. Like we were on the same schedule. We were going to bed really early together because he would get up with me in the morning. Like there were not situations where I was getting up at 4 or 5 a.m. to go round and, he would just stay asleep, or that he was staying up way later than me, where we had different sleep schedules or anything like that.
Yeah, that was probably the biggest adjustment. I mean, honestly, I've always been kind of an early night guy, especially during the week. Like if I wasn't going out when I was younger, like I was probably in sleep by 10 at the latest anyway. But yeah, I mean, we were like getting ready for bed at 8 o'clock. And then up at 4:35, whatever it was, which of course then trained Edley and Beignet to get up that early. So then that just became our schedule, like no matter what. Very hard to sleep in on weekends after that. But yeah, I mean, realistically, like we just had to cut out a lot of stuff, right? Like I stopped watching sports for a long time, basically, because games will start at 7:30, and maybe catch a few minutes of it and go to sleep, which was fine. I mean, this is like a relatively easy sacrifice, obviously. But it is what happens. I mean, you just have to really change your lifestyle in a lot of ways. If we were going to go out to dinner, we were going to go out and do something. I mean, it was like, if we don't get out of the house by 6 o'clock, 5:30, we're done. Like we're not, we never ate dinner
I mean,
past,
like
7 o'clock.
5:10. Yeah, I won't go
Yeah. If you
out
got out in
after.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, as a resident, I definitely wouldn't. But just in terms of one of the things that really did help though, and like it really started that year. So as a second year, when I did have consults like in the middle of the night, or we also had the 2 a.m. flap check, that's an ENT junior's task. Colin would typically drive me in for all of those. And, I mean, that's going way above and beyond the call, but I will say that it really made it feel like we were a team. And also, I mean, it made it much more enjoyable. I mean, still not very enjoyable, but in terms of like, being miserable, driving around alone at night, maybe falling asleep at the wheel too, I actually had like a true partner and buddy, and also like a safer driver who wasn't as sleep deprived.
Yeah. I mean, more than anything, I think it's just dangerous for you to be driving back and forth. And sadly, I mean, that's what most people do. Most residents are just driving themselves back and forth, just like completely out of it, getting woken up. All of a sudden, you got to hop in the car, throw your scrubs on, drive in at 2:30 in the morning. And then you might be there all night and then just have to like round again in the
Yeah.
morning. I'm
Oh,
not like breaking
absolutely.
any news here, but it's pretty wild.
Yeah, and I think that, just uh, we could talk all day about the transitions during training, but the transition to senior call, that was the next like really big crazy one. Before we get into relationship tips here, just to kind of share anecdotally, like when we started 4th year senior call, that ran Friday morning at 7 a.m. until the next Friday morning at 7 a.m. And so it could be okay because, your second call, you're the senior, you're not the junior or first call. So we weren't getting phone calls anymore that were like nurses asking for Tylenol for a floor patient, but we were getting all of the outside hospital calls and also all of the patient and patient family member phone calls. So still kind of a lot of ancillary phone activity, sometimes like somebody calling in at 1 or 2 a.m. and you can like hear the party in the background and they'd be like, can we have more narcotics? Can we have more oxycodone? And you'd just be like, oh, no, sorry. And they just hang up, but that's a wake up, like that's a sleep interruption. And anyway, the first couple times that I took senior call, that last Friday morning when I was driving to work, like day 7, kind of not much sleep for 7 days in a row, being on 24/7, I backed up into our car garage while it was still in the process of opening. So it was like half open and I just, was totally discombobulated, like probably pretty much asleep and just would back up into it, which that really puts a dent in the garage door. That's probably worse than if you just backed up into it and it's just like closed the whole time. But Colin was nice about it. I did that twice, 2 separate times where it got fixed in between.
Yeah, one of them was like during, I don't know if it was during like sort of the height of COVID, but it was during, the first whatever 6 months of COVID or something. And we like couldn't get a garage door. It was during all these kind of supply chain issue stuffs. I mean, we just had a broken garage door for like over a month or something. I remember that. Like they had to ship one in from, several states away. It was a crazy process. But yeah, I mean, it just shows how insane that whole, 7 days on is just wild. And it always was. It was the last Friday morning. It was like, we're done. Like, you're finally done with call. Like, just got to survive the day. And then boom, you'd come back in. You'd be like, hey, I think I hit the garage door again.
Yeah. I love that. I would be like, hey, I think I hit it. It's like, seeing a 45-degree angle. It's like hanging off of the garage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's me trying to do like a gentle spin zone, I guess. But anyway, now we did want to kind of delve into basically just concrete relationship tips, like not saying we're experts, but there are a couple of things that like really helped a lot, especially again, as things got busier, by 3rd year, for sure, by 4th year, senior call, all the administrative duties, and also just like much greater operative responsibility and clinical responsibility that comes with being a senior. But one thing that helped a lot, I mean, I don't even remember where I first read or heard this, but it basically just said this idea where to change gears, that when you leave work, so I would leave the hospital, I would call Colin immediately. I had about a 10 to 13 minute commute home and I would just let it all out. I'd just recap the day. I'd be like, here are the 6 beefs that I have from today. And when I arrived home, the policy was like, I pull into the garage, I get out of the car, that phone call ends. That was it. That was the time that I had to recap the day, vent about the day. And what was really nice is then there was no more. Then there was a moratorium on work talk. And like, honestly, the moratorium on work talk was probably one of the best things that we ever did for our relationship.
Yeah. I mean, that basically stemmed from before then. It was, you would come home, you'd be exhausted. You would, kind of vent about what was going on. Maybe you get a consult or you get text from someone. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I think what I didn't know about residency was just the sheer amount of like when you're not in the hospital, you're still just going to get tons of stuff coming in your way. Like you were just getting texts and calls constantly. Even if you weren't on call, just someone else, another resident saying, hey, did you see this person? I was going to put this order in. Like just constant check-in stuff or scheduling or, studying for exams or whatever. I mean, you rarely get a chance to just come home and kind of unwind. You can never turn your phone off basically. So then, when you were coming home, spending, 20, 30, 40 minutes talking about the hospital, whatever. We'd eat dinner, you'd be exhausted, you'd kind of tune out, put on a show or something. And then it was like time to go to bed. And then we kind of realized, hey, this is just happening a lot where like you're just so wound up the entire time that you're home. And, I think you're basically trying to like dissociate more than just, okay, let's get away from the hospital, use home, Beignet, Edley, the whole crew as like your kind of place to recenter. And it worked great because you had what, like maybe 10-minute drive home, depending which
Mhm.
hospital you were coming from. But that was like the perfect time because you usually got out after me. So I was usually home. I was, walking Beignet or whatever. And so, it was like the second you pulled it in the garage, shut it down. And then that's it. Like now we kind of live our home life and, try to get you to actually enjoy the small amount of time that you have outside of the hospital.
Yeah, the work moratorium talk really just did help me more than anything because then there'd even be times like if it's a gorgeous weekend and we're on a walk with our dog, like the intrusive thoughts would want to come at times and by just literally myself cutting myself off or Colin being like, hey, work moratorium, like then it would just be shut down. And I definitely found that like once I started identifying that and honoring that, like, there's all these things like what you feed grows, And so by just not engaging in like perseveration about work, it helped a lot to just truly be less bothered by work. One quote that I really love that this kind of all, makes me think of is this. I realized I spoke more passionately about the things that upset me more than the things that brought me peace and happiness. I don't want to be the kind of person who obsesses over their pain. I'm learning how to change the conversation and redirect that energy creatively.
Yeah, I remember you saying that at some point. I've definitely heard that before. It is something that I think you had to work on because, like you said, there were just so many things to deal with in residency that, we could spend an entire weekend just dissecting it. And sometimes it's hard because, you want to have constructive conversations about it and we really had to watch ourselves from like okay, this is purposeful and we're sort of talking strategy and actual ways to deal with this stuff versus just you know complaining or really kind of digging in and feeling bad about it. And honestly, even sometimes we were having constructive conversations and then we'd realize, hey, we've been talking about this for like an hour and I just want to enjoy the nice day, like we got to just pretend the hospital doesn't exist.
Yeah, which sounds like a totally impossible feat at first, but it's something that can be practiced and ultimately achieved. Okay, so to go on to this last big topic, relationship contracts. I don't know if you guys have heard about these or not, but there's a huge Time article from 2019 on relationship contracts. We'll link it in the notes for you and everything. But basically, when I learned about this, like kind of, midway through residency, I was like, whoa, well, this is pretty cool. Like we should give this a shot. And, just kind of for broader context, Colin and I, we got engaged second year. We actually had our initial wedding booked for the first weekend of April 2020. So we were one of the first COVID wedding cancellations. And when that call was made, the global pandemic was announced like 2 weeks before the wedding. We had no food in the house. The fridge was filled with the juice cleanse. I was like going crazy doing final preparations for the wedding. But of course, I'd been watching the news and I'd been telling Colin, hey, like, this is looking pretty bad. Hey, our New Orleans destination wedding looks like kind of one of the first epicenters here and, all this stuff. But of course, yes. So we absolutely we canceled once the pandemic was announced, and I bought like 2 birthday cakes, 3 pizzas. We threw out all the juice. We just, from that standpoint, we partied a little bit, not from the global pandemic standpoint. But okay. Regardless, we ended up then eloping that fall of 2020 in Malibu, just the two of us, and the New Orleans wedding ended up, rescheduled for a year and a half later. So when I was a chief, we had our big New Orleans party with friends and family, and it was great. So I say all this context just to paint the picture, like, we were together, like we were very committed, we were engaged for most of residency and things like that. So anyone who is engaging in a long-term committed relationship, I definitely think benefits from these types of like relationship contracts. But basically, these contracts are not designed to like tackle a specific challenge, but instead they can help couples map out and agree on what really matters to them long term. And having an explicit agreement makes it easier for couples to navigate the many transitions that they face across their working lives together. So you can create a roadmap for how to face unexpected challenges now. And that way, when they arise, you're prepared for them. And this really like directly links back to what Colin was talking about in terms of before the match, just talking about, well, what is our plan going to be? What if we match at the spot we want to? What if we end up in an unexpected city? Like, am I good with going to any of these cities on your 20 city list? Things like that. Couple contracting involves in-depth discussion of 3 areas: values, boundaries, and fears. And so values, of course, that you can sit down and discuss includes like what makes you happy or proud, what gives you satisfaction, and what is your definition of a good life. Under boundaries, the types of questions that they discuss are: what lines are you unwilling to cross? And are there any certain geographic locations you could not stomach moving to? Are there geographic locations you would not be willing to leave? And how many hours would your partner have to work each week for your life together to be unmanageable? And so what I also really loved about like this whole concept of relationship contracts is, of course, you can meet on the timeline that works for you two independently. I've certainly read about different ones that are every 6 months or quarterly. Everything that can be included in the contract can range from bigger picture stuff like financial freedom, the decision to have kids, all the way down to minutia, like how is the housework distributed? Who is responsible for cooking? Who does the vacuuming? What's cool about contracts is that they do provide a built-in occasion to sit down with your partner and talk about what is or isn't working without feeling like, you're nagging, or without. It also kind of is a nice way to avoid catching somebody when they're not in the right headspace, like all of us have moments where we're probably like less able to or willing to receive feedback, of course. Whereas if this is just a regular like quarterly event, hey, this is our check-in. Okay, we're gonna like read our contracts, make any addendums necessary, like update any sections necessary. Another thing that I really enjoyed implementing was this thought where, okay, so instead of just like, nitpicking day by day or nagging somebody about something day by day, instead, if you just notice something that bothers you, like mostly, I'll use examples of stuff I do that is bothersome, which is like leave, cups near the sink, but not like put them in the dishwasher. But instead of just kind of like every day being like, hey, please do this, instead, it can go onto the agenda for the next relationship check-in, at which point it can be kind of like discussed in this very, two-way manner, and then maybe even put into the contract. One way of thinking that I really enjoyed reading about was just, it was this perspective. It was a long op-ed on divorce after the fact. And what the person had kind of reflected on is that he was like, my wife did always ask me to put the dishes like in the dishwasher, not just leave them in the sink. I really never thought it was a big deal. Like she was just freaking out about it. It always seemed to like matter hugely to her. I kept being like, who cares? And in this reflection, he was like, what I didn't realize the whole time is that it was meaningful and a big deal to her. So I wish I'd done it. Like just because, and I can definitely relate to that, because there are things that you just think, well, this isn't that big of a deal. And it definitely doesn't bother me. But it's a great reminder just that like if something does bother your partner, treating that with very substantial weight is part of the key to, a healthy long-term relationship.
This was definitely pretty important. I feel like this was a nice turning point in a way because, after junior call, I mean, it goes on for 2 years. You're just exhausted by the end of this. Like, I feel like every day became just let's get through the day. And then we were just waiting for that one weekend day that you might have off. And when we finally got free time, it was, well, we got to have fun. We got to do something, enjoy ourselves. And we just never really carved out time for like these types of conversations. And it definitely let stuff linger. And it was usually little stuff like that. It was like, please don't leave the laundry unfolded after it's, dried. Just like, yeah, seemingly small things that can just irritate you. And especially when you're under the amount of stress that you were under, like we just tried to eliminate as many of those things as possible, or at least have like an open discussion about like why things are happening and what sort of are the trade-offs for it. I think that idea of like, rather than kind of nitpicking or criticizing in the moment, but like I remember we used to just sort of keep running lists. Like I just had a list in my phone, and it's just like like a grievances list in a way. But the idea was like I would just write it down kind of without any context, and I would just say, I don't even know, like whatever, didn't pick up Beignet's toys or something. And then if we had something scheduled, like our, relationship dinner or whatever it was, 2 months down the line, the day before I would look at that list, and usually half the time I'd be like, I have no idea what this is. Obviously it's not that big a deal. I was just frustrated in the moment, or it was something, I found irritating and wanted to air some grievances about. But okay, now looking back at my list, there are, 2-3 things I actually want to discuss. And we can kind of have basically, I think this was written by a lawyer or something, right? Where, and that's sort of the structure we used. It was like, okay, I'm going to present my initial arguments, and then we're going to kind of go back and forth and determine, a way that we can sort of both win in this situation, right? Like, do we actually need to do this? And in often cases, for example, like you were always trying to get fresh fruit and, have water bottles on hand and stuff like that. And I, didn't always have time to run out to the store, or frankly, I was just, tired and kind of didn't want to cook or something that night. And so, an easy compromise at times was, okay, let's try out like a meal service. We get things delivered to us. It's an easy, 15-20 minute thing. And it's only 2-3 times a week. So it's sort of more like an event. And it saves, having to go to the store, get fresh fruit or whatever it's going to be. And it's just like an easy compromise, and it's kind of a win-win. And without, intentionally setting that out and kind of working through the issue, I don't know that we would have come to that. It would have just been more kind of sniping.
Absolutely. I know my grievances list, like it doesn't make any sense. I can't make heads or tails of it. So then by the time that negotiations roll around, I'm just like, honestly, things are pretty good. Like if I cannot remember, what my issue with X item was, then it obviously was not that big of an issue.
The grievances stuff, sure, like that's kind of an easy thing to point out. But realistically, I think what gets solved with this is the true like bigger issue, or not even issues necessarily, but just the bigger topics or long-term decisions and things that can easily get put off. You are a pretty direct person, and you generally will express, what you want. I'm not really like that. I'm, more vibey, I guess. And so it's easy to just kind of like, coast through. And, I'm more of the mindset, if it, que sera, right? But in this way, it sort of forces us to both come together and like have real talks about what our future is going to look like. Where do we want to move? What type of job do you want to take? That was a big thing, right? Like, do you want to do a fellowship? Do you want to stay in academics? Do you want to do private practice? Where do we want to live? Where do you want to interview? And, I think without us coming together, taking the time to really examine all those things you kind of laid out, right? Like, what are the values that we have? Like, what are the boundaries and sort of fears? Like, how can we plan for these things, in a way that both kind of satisfies what we're looking for, and then doesn't leave anyone blindsided. And also you have a really good understanding of like the thought process that each of you are going through, so that even if you're upset about it or it's not the way that you wanted it to, like, you understand how you got there, as opposed to now something happened and you haven't had these kind of, foundational conversations behind it.
Yeah. And I think a very practical takeaway for any physicians, residents, is the geographic location piece, because you'd hate to, be tied to a job now in a different geographic location and you learn that your partner has no intention of ever leaving, the West Coast. Like, that's something that should just kind of be well hashed out and on the books ahead of time. Because even in the like non-healthcare industry versions of this, I've read about, just like two people who are in a corporate power couple, they both work, one person gets the job offer of their dreams. And when they bring it to their partner and they say, hey, this is where we'd have to relocate to, that person is just not open to it because they are not open to that geographic location, or part of the world. And so those are great conversations to just have. And of course, help you have a better understanding of the other person as well. Thank you so much for joining me today, Colin. I really do think that you could teach a class on how to be the partner of a resident physician.
Well, I definitely put in plenty of time for it, so I feel like I got my own 5-year degree.
10,000 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you are like legitimately an expert, I think. Follow me on Instagram at francismay.md and at Rethinking Residency. Visit my website, rethinkingresidency.com, to learn more about resident physician stories and ways that residents can most effectively navigate the game of residency. I cannot wait to connect with you on the next episode of Promising Young Surgeon.